The Blue Earth Village was the home of the Kaw Nation near Manhattan, Kansas. There were at least 120 lodges and an estimated 1,500 Kansa living at the village. It was one of the largest settlements for the Kaw Nation, with all three bands living in the same place under Fool Chief, Hard Chief, and American Chief. Man, what a cool name. American Chief? That's just a downright badass patriotic name right there. But the principal chief was Fool Chief. That might sound bad out of context, but the truth is, that name meant that that chief had his people's back to a fool's errand, which makes it pretty cool. I'd follow a guy like that into battle. I don't know about you. My name's Jeremy. I'm just a guy that nerds out on history, especially when it comes to Native American. I have no affiliation with any organization or group and do the research on my own, which means I'm limited to what I can find on the internet and in books. I'm no bookworm, so I'm going to lay it out as I found it and give you a few of my thoughts along the way. So if I get something completely wrong, I apologize and I will happily correct it. With that said, let's dive into the Blue Earth Village. Most of us know where the Blue Earth Village was. Anyone living in or around Manhattan, Kansas, along with many other native Kansans, knows about it. Hell, I grew up an hour and a half away and I was taught it in school when I was a kid. It was on the left bank of the Kaw or Kansas River, just east of the confluence with the Blue River. The east end of the village was around Green Valley Road today, or Dempsey Drive, and spread west for about half a mile along that Highway 24 corridor. It's that section of land where the Big Blue River runs parallel to the Kansas River, and it kind of forms a peninsula. I'm going to take this moment, though, and I'm going to shamelessly advocate for some kind of historic marker to be placed there. I mean, it's our local history, state history, it's the Kaw Nation history. So why isn't it marked yet? It's been obliterated by farming, flooding, erosion, built communities and businesses on top of it. So it's not going to hurt anything to celebrate it. I say we do it. So we know where the Blue Earth Village is. There are maps showing its exact location, which were really hard for me to find when I started looking into this. But in my research, I could not find any information on how long it was there. Not definitively, that is. It ranges from 20 years to 100 years depending on the source. The truth is, nobody knows because the Kaw, like all tribes, didn't keep records of such meager events. They moved all the time, so it wasn't anything special to them. Well, I figured I'd just go to the Kaw and ask them, and I got no response. But I did find on the Kaw Nation's website a timeline, and that said that they moved to Blue Earth in 1723. Which may be true if it's off by 1 year. But the reference is from a journal written by the French explorer Bourgmont, who found the Kaw village in July of 1724. That's right, I said 1724. So I looked up his journal of that trip, and Bourgmont clearly has them on the Missouri River. On July 8, 1724, 1 year later than what the timeline says. Bourgmont's expedition crossed the Missouri River in pirogues and landed a musket shot away from the village. And that is a cool way to measure something. Where do you live? About a musket shot east of the Missouri River. I like that. I think I'm going to start using that. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't move later that year, but there's nothing in the records to prove that they ended up at Blue Earth in 1724. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the Kaw's history is completely wrong, but that info has to be off by 1 year anyway. It could be as simple as a typo when they were making the timeline. I don't know. Maybe they don't know. Who knows? That's what we're here asking. So for now, let's just say that 1724 date is tentative. And then there's a big gap to the next record. Well, at least according to what I could find. 83 years to be exact. So that's an 83-year window that the Kaw could have moved to Blue Earth Village. In 1806, Zebulon Pike, that's right, Mr. Pike's Peak himself, came through what would become Kansas, and he was trying to establish peace between the Osage and the Kaw along his way to the Rockies. Now, Pike did not visit the Blue Earth Village. There were Osage scouts with Pike, but they were really leery about running into the Kaw, so they guided the party really far south and around to the west of the Kaw lands, hoping not to run into him for fear of their own lives. So Pike sent a message to the village for the Kaw chiefs to meet them at the Republican Pawnee village for peace talks. There wasn't much delay in the Kaw catching up, which kind of suggests that they were most likely at Blue Earth, because their other village at the Missouri was over 100 miles away. Pike kept his path north, but to the west of the village site, kind of blazing the path for Highway 81, coordinating the rendezvous at the Republican Pawnee village where they would all sit down, smoke the peace pipe, and put an end to all the hostilities. And guys, this is not a debate anymore. The village Pike visited was not the Pawnee Indian Village Museum site in Kansas. Pike was able to establish peace between the Osage and the Kaw, and it has lasted to this day. The Pawnee, though, well, that's a different story. 5 years later, Major George Sibley took on this task. In May of 1811, Major Sibley was sent to establish peace between the Pawnee and the Kaw Nations. This is the first account that I could find of Blue Earth Village. Maybe. There is controversy surrounding this, so let's dive into it. This gets interesting, so pay attention, and I promise I'll do my best. Sibley describes the village as being by the main river, which would be the Kansas, with a creek to the east, and the North Fork of the river to the west, and beautiful rolling prairie hills to the north. The houses were made of lodgepole, bark, and mat, rectangular in shape, and very accommodating. Some even had buffalo rug floors, and they were made in a way that catastrophic destruction would make them easy to rebuild or repair. He reiterated on how comfortable they were, which makes me rethink my house now. Okay, controversy time. Most scholars seem to think that the description of the position of the village and the rectangle houses and the fact that his term for the river to the west being the North Fork puts this village at the Pawnee or Republican River as it's known now. The Republican River has been called the North Fork of the Kansas for as long as the Euros have been in this area. Okay, those are fair points, and I'd say they make some sense. We know that the lodges in Blue Earth were round, but there's geological evidence of the Kansas having many big floods, and sometimes yearly. And there's always the raiding parties of other tribes that happen to burn everything to the ground, so that's a viable option for rebuilding too. As I've already noted, there are discrepancies in the recorded history. So, the proposed site at the Republican River has yielded no archaeological evidence of a village. There has been artifacts found there, and I have no doubt that all the tribes used it as a campsite. But the lack of evidence is explained away by scholars as the material used in building the lodges is organic, so the evidence is already completely gone. But what about the holes for the earth lodge poles? Any pottery? Any trade items? Areas for processing game? Workshops for working flint? None of that exists at the Republican site, but it does at Blue Earth. And I don't know about you, but I've been to both places many times. The description that Sibley gives both, they fit pretty well. Both are beautiful sites. Both are confluence points, which are important to all natives. But Blue Earth is a better option in my opinion, with much more space for permanent settlement, with open fields for planting and space for horses, which was important for sure. The Republican site is much smaller, And with over 1,000 people, it doesn't seem likely to have the capacity for all that. With the Big Blue River just to the west of Blue Earth, Sibley could have thought it was the North Fork, or maybe he just used that nomenclature because that's what he knew. And there is a creek to the east of the site at Blue Earth. In fact, on old maps, there's a creek running from a pond, and that pond is still there. Today, the creek drain is gone, but it shows it on the old maps. So maybe that's the one they were talking about. My opinion, based on the info that I could find and a bit of common sense, is that the village site was always at the confluence of the Blue River. The next account is by far the best. In August of 1819, on the Major Long expedition, yep, that Major Long of Long's Peak, the tallest mountain in the Rockies, Dr. Thomas Say was dispatched with something like 12 men to go up to the Kansas River and make contact with the Kaw and ask for their safe passage through the territory. He no doubt was at Blue Earth Village near Manhattan, and I'll tell you why. The first documented picture of the village is a sketch by Titan Ramsey Peale, and it shows the round earthen lodges with doors facing east and Bluemont Hill in the background. Anyone familiar with this area knows that line of sight, and anyone with interest in natives knows that the doors always face the east. So, the direction wasn't marked on the drawing, but knowing the east-facing door tradition and the Bluemont Bluff, there is no doubt. And Say also described exactly where he was, so there's that too. Say describes the warm welcome, culture, beliefs, dress, food, and the village in his notes. If you're interested in the rest, it's a pretty informative read, but for this I'm just going to stick to the village description itself. Although I have to say, I have found the recipe and I do make the corn, bean, and bison stew, and it is incredible. I highly recommend that everyone try it. It's delicious and it's a power food packed with protein. So, here's Say's description of the village. Quote, "The approach to the village is over a fine level prairie of considerable extent, passing which you ascend an abrupt bank of the height of 10 feet to a second level, on which the village is situate in the distance, within about 1/4 of a mile to the river. It consists of about 120 lodges, placed as closely together as convenient, and destitute of any regularity of arrangement. The ground area of each lodge is circular, and is excavated to the depth from 1 to 3 feet, and the general form of the exterior may be denominated hemispheric. The lodge in which we reside is larger than any other in town, and being that of the Grand Chief, it serves as a council house for the nation. The roof is supported by 2 series of pillars or rough vertical posts, forked at the top for the reception of the transverse connecting pieces of each series. 12 of these pillars from the outer series placed in a circle, and 8 longer ones in the inner series, also describing a circle. The outer wall of rude frame, placed at a proper distance from the exterior series of pillars, is 5 or 6 feet high. Poles, as thick as the leg at the base, rest with their butts upon the wall, extending on the cross pieces, which are upheld by the pillars of the 2 series and are of sufficient length to reach nearly to the summit. The poles are very numerous and agreeably to the position we have indicated. They are placed all around in radiating manner and support the roof like rafters. Across these are laid long and slender sticks or twigs, attached parallel to each other by means of bark cord. These are covered by mats made of long grass or reeds or with bark of trees. The whole is then covered completely over with earth, which, near the ground, is banked up to the eaves. A hole is permitted to remain in the middle of the roof to give exit to the smoke. Around the walls of the interior are continuous series of mats are suspended. These are neat workmanship, composed of soft reed united by bark cord in straight or undulating lines, between which lines of black paint sometimes occur. Bedsteads are elevated to the height of a common seat from the ground, and they are about 6 feet wide. They extend in an uninterrupted line around 3/4 of the circumference of the apartment, and are formed in the simplest manner of numerous sticks, or slender pieces of wood, resting at the ends on cross pieces, which are supported by short notched or forked posts driven into the ground. Bison skins supply them with comfortable bedding. Several medicine or mystic bags are carefully attached to the mats of the wall. These are cylindrical and neatly bound up. Several wreaths are usually placed upon them, and a human scalp serves for their fringe and tassels. Of their contents we know nothing. The fireplace is a simple shallow cavity in the center of the apartment, with an upright and a projecting arm for the support of the culinary apparatus." End quote. So at this point, there is no doubt that the Kaw are living at Blue Earth Village just east of the Blue River. This is the origin of the 1800, 1810-ish starting date that some of the scholars give as a starting point for the village. But I think it's probably much earlier than this. In 1828, Isaac McCoy was sent on an exploration to the Indian Territory, which later became the state of Kansas, to scout the nature of the land for the tribes that were going to be sent here from the east. He visited Blue Earth Village on September 18th and recorded in his journal an almost identical experience as Dr. Say and his group had at the Blue Earth Village, with the crowds and the hospitality and feasting again and again. By this time, the Kaw Nation had already ceded most of their lands to the government back in 1825. The Kaw Agency had already been established, and Chouteau promised to build a trading post on Mission Creek near Topeka. McCoy came through a second time on an exploration in 1830, and he made no mention of the village. He only reported encountering a couple of Kaw hunters returning from a buffalo hunt with the tribe in tow. It is possible that the village was still in use, or at least used as a camp then, but it's reported that in 1830, the three head chiefs had split the Blue Earth Village and moved to 3 separate villages downstream on the Kansas River. So we know when the Blue Earth Village was abandoned, but there's still no solid evidence to when it was established. I kind of tend to lean towards the longer habitation than not, but no matter how long the Kaw Nation were at Blue Earth, there is no question why they were there. It's an ideal place for a village. There was another mention of the village in 1842, I believe. This is also up for debate, and there are many facets to this debate, but I'll try not to go too deep. The Fremont expedition came through here on their way to the Rockies, and they were making maps and collecting specimens for scientific research back east. In his notes, he mentions crossing the Kaw River at Uniontown, which is the original name for Topeka. By the way, did you know Topeka means a good place for potatoes in the native tongue? Potatoes! No wonder there's so many jokes about Topeka. Why is everyone in Topeka tired all the time? Because they get up at 4 a.m. Why do Topekans make such good detectives? Because they keep their eyes peeled. What do you call 2 Topekans that hate each other? Starch enemies. Why are Topekans so happy at the end of the week? Because it's Friday! I always thought the jokes were about the politicians. Anyway, once Fremont was on the north side of the Kansas River, he mentions running into and dealing with a large number of Kaw. Traveling up the Kansas, he found an abandoned village that was partially burned. He claimed it was on the east side of the Little Vermilion, he called it. After exploring the village, he later caught up with the expedition to cross the Vermilion and camped on the west side. He even gave the coordinates of where they camped. I think he was a little off on his names and maybe wasn't sure where he was at, but I'll try to break it down piece by piece. First, there's the mini Kaw that he ran into. 1831 to 1848, Fool Chief's village was just to the west of Soldiers Creek, on the north side of the Kansas River. It's probable that he encountered people from that village. During the same years, Hard Chief's village was on the west side of the Vermilion and the north side of the Kansas River. It's certain that he would have come across many people from that village. The west setting is what's important here. He stated that after exploring the abandoned village, that he traveled north up the east bank of the Vermilion to meet the expedition at the ford where they crossed and camped on the west side. B. The coordinates. His original coordinates were made with a piece of equipment that was later replaced by something more accurate, which he used on his second exploration. So he went back after his second exploration and quote-unquote corrected his original coordinate he took on the first trip. And he just used a formula. Needless to say, I'm throwing out the corrected coordinates because there's a 20-mile difference. You plug them into maps and you'll see they don't make any sense. I think that's kind of a hokey way of doing things anyway. It just seems a little too unscientific, like there's room for bias or it's a way to adjust information to match your story. His original coordinates may be a little off, but I give them more credit. The original coordinates put the campsite towards the end of Lakewood Ridge Road on the west side of the Tuttle Creek Dam. That's north of the Rocky Ford, the best place to cross the Big Blue River at that time, and it was on a major Indian trail. Everyone crossed there until 1854 when the first ferry was put in at the Big Blue River at Juniata. Now third, and this is the big one, he describes crossing a deep stream and riding some miles distance to the left towards the abandoned village that was on the mouth of the river. The village was large, scattered in an open wooded area, quote, on a spot chosen with the customary Indian fondness for beauty and scenery, unquote. His description has to be the Blue Earth Village site. The occupied villages that he had already seen would not have been nearly as large, and there is no comparison to the Vermilion site, not to mention it wasn't wooded. I'm not saying it's ugly, but it's a massive alluvial plain for miles. The bluffs are much further from the Kansas River at the Vermilion site, and it simply is not as stunning as the Blue Earth site. It's just flat for miles. The deep creek he crossed some miles before heading to the village is most likely Sand Creek to the east of the Blue Earth Village, some 2 miles east. Upon leaving the village to catch up with the expedition, he would have traveled north, up the east bank of the Blue River, crossed the river at Rocky Ford, and then camped on the west side. Knowing both sites fairly intimately, there's no doubt in my mind that he was describing the Blue Earth Village. In 1880, a Manhattan lawyer named Henry Stackpole was tasked with mapping the Blue Earth Village site by the Kansas Historical Society. His map is supposed to be pretty accurate and was used by Kansas native Waldo Weddell, boy, that's a mouthful, to do an archaeological dig of one of the lodges for the Smithsonian Institute in 1937. His excavation of the lodge floor exposed the lodge pole pockets, cache pit, hearth, and confirmed that the doors faced east. And that just about exhausts the extent of my knowledge of the Blue Earth Village. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you ever get out that way, take a few minutes and find a place to pull over and just admire it as it was. Imagine what it would look like without all the buildings, and I think you'll agree it must have been a pretty amazing place to live. And who knows, it if you listen close enough, you might even hear Fool Chief himself give you a big ho or highway. But the question remains, how long did the Kaw live there?